Welcome to a new episode of the InfoTech Growth Partner Podcast, the podcast where the future of IT unfolds and we dive deep into the pertinent developments in regards to IT and data with leaders and experts in the IT consulting field. My name is Jasper, and today I have the pleasure to have Perninder Dhadwar in the show. Perninder is the CEO at Imobisoft, and it's great to have you on the show, Perninder. Welcome.
Great. Thank you very much, Jasper, for the invite, and it's wonderful to be here today.
Awesome. Likewise. Can you give the listener and the audience a little bit of an introduction to your own background, what Imobisoft does, of course, and what your role within the company is?
Sure. So I'm the CEO of Imobisoft. Business has been going for about 13 years, and we're based up in Coventry on the Coventry University Technology Park. And when we describe Imobisoft, we normally say we are a bespoke software development company. But at the heart of what we do is really solving business problems for clients using technology. And in terms of my own background, before Imobisoft, I was the Chief Operating Officer for a large digital agency based in London. And that's been my role since here as well.
Perfect. Well, you already touched upon it, and that is the first topic that we want to dive a little bit deeper into, really about, the role of technology in solving business problems. I think technology on itself should never be the goal, just implementing technology, but it should be a means to get to a specific business outcome, solve a problem, get closer to a goal. And I think especially with bespoke development, that's definitely the case, because you're really doing that to solve a specific problem or a specific need. Can you talk us a little bit through the common misconceptions that clients have and companies and people in general about technology, and thinking that it's the ultimate solution to all of their problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite a common misconception that if we build a piece of technology, it will solve our problems. And it's not to say that doesn't, that does work sometimes, but the way that I always look at it is, if you replace a bad process, which is currently giving you the wrong outcomes, with a technology solution, all that's giving you is the means to deliver bad outcomes, but faster and more efficiently. So on one side, you would say, wow, we've improved the efficiency of the process, but actually you haven't actually changed the outcome if all you've done is replicated the bad processes that you had. And this is quite a common theme when we sit down and we talk about designing out solutions from the top end and we investigate processes, because clients are so often have for many years worked in their processes. The only way they can envisage the technology solution is being something that will replicate what they do, but in a digital environment. And so moving them away from that and saying, well, actually, let's not think about the process that you've currently got. Let's think about what is the end goal that we're trying to achieve here. And that quite often gets us to a better place in terms of trying to design the right technology solution, as opposed to when a client brief normally starts with, can you replace X? Which, to be honest, is, from a client's perspective, is an easy way of being a brief, but normally is not the right way to start something.
Yeah, and how would you do that? Because when you get into a business, as you said, things have been the way they are for a couple of years, most probably. Mm-hmm. People have just been doing it, the process has been developed over the last couple of years. Where would you start? What are the questions that you guys would ask for them to realize where they should start, and where they should think about the process first?
Yeah, so I mean, to be fair, it's not even a couple of years. Sometimes you're going to businesses and the same thing has been done for over not just 1 or 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, sometimes even. And asking the why question is normally the biggest simple way to get to the crux of what a process is designed for. And when you get to the answer of, well, why do we do this? And you've asked it a few times, and the answer you get back is, because we've always done it like that. At that point, you've normally hit a point where you can say, okay, this process, nobody knows now why we're doing it. We're only doing it because everybody else has done it, or it's always been done this way. And that's normally a ripe area for us to really be able to investigate and say, well, actually, is this something we can remove entirely? So actually, if we didn't do this process tomorrow, what would the outcome be? If this is a report that's being generated by an output, but actually all that happens is the reports get generated, it gets sent to a particular department. That department then files it somewhere else because that's part of what they do. Then actually, if you take that out entirely, nobody actually knows that that process is now no longer happening. So that's the kind of questions that we really do, is digging down into the whys of what the client is doing, as opposed to just asking, what are you doing?
Yeah, and well, if you go deeper into the why, should everything that you do in terms of technologies and processes, does everything have to be tied back to the mission and vision and the strategy of the company? And even thinking about how does this add to our bottom or either top line of the business? Should that be the case always?
I would say that in some cases that is definitely true, but there is, I suppose, there's layers of technology solutions, and there are some cases where actually we're only replacing a process that is almost a hygiene process within business. So effectively, it's a day-to-day process, and irrespective of whether I'm in this company or another company that's in the same industry, they will all do the same thing. So in that case, all we're trying to do is trying to make that process as efficient as possible. However, where we're implementing technology which then is creating something new or a new pathway of doing something, that's when I think it's really important that we have to make sure that before we go down that route, will this new process that we're creating or a new output that we're creating be aligned with what the company actually requires? It's no good if we can give them a process which effectively increases the efficiency of widget X, but actually in the company plan, they're moving away from selling widget X. And in 5 years' time, that will become a dormant line and they will move into something else. All I've done is made them produce something which they don't really need to produce significantly. So the importance of, as soon as we start stepping outside of replacing hygiene processes, is that you're right, they have to be aligned with where is the company going, what is the long-term goal? Because quite often some of these technology solutions are, especially in the SME world, are significant investments for them, and their payback will come over multiple years. So if we are not aligned with that longer-term vision, the danger becomes that your clients invest a lot upfront now, but actually in the years they think they're going to reap the benefits of that, the business is actually moving away from what that process was doing. So it's really important. And one of the biggest issues is that technology changes so fast now, is that trying to see that longer term payback period is becoming more and more difficult for clients.
Yeah, and I can imagine, because in the end it is still like, you can talk a lot about processes and technologies, but in the end it's about people using those
Yeah.
processes. Can you,
Yeah.
is there any resistance that you face in those types of companies that you work with, or are there any challenges in making sure that people are willing to change, are willing to adopt a new process and a new technology?
Yeah, I think that this is one of the things that it's discussed quite often, and we don't have the magic bullet for it, but there is the reality check of pushing through technological change is only one aspect. And quite often, what's happening is that the business is going through some form of cultural change or structural change, or the technology solution that is being implemented will inevitably mean those changes need to happen. But nobody wants to grasp those because those are difficult issues to deal with. People focus on the technology aspect. And in some cases, management quite often hide behind the technology change and don't tackle the bigger issues of cultural change or structural change, and use the technology almost as the, well, this isn't our fault. I mean, an example where I worked on a large digital transformation for a financial services business, and I was part of the team. And there, it was replacing some of the workflows that the administrative staff were doing, but effectively, ultimately, it meant that whole core set of staff would have less work, which ultimately would mean that there was probably a requirement of less of those people or those skill sets. Now, they could be deployed elsewhere in the business, or ultimately, it may mean a reduction in headcount. But quite deep into the project, and when we were doing one of our playbacks of actually, okay, we built this piece of the system now, and here it is in demonstration. And one of the most senior members of the board asked, "Well, what's going to happen to the people that are doing this role currently?" And it realized to me that actually a large chunk of the management team had been using this as actually, this is the inevitable outcome, as opposed to right at the start saying, we are embarking on a change in the business. The technology is one aspect of it. There will be some changes to our structure, and there will be some cultural issues. And if you don't deal with them then, the projects tend to hit problems much further down the line. And they tend to hit big problems as well, because once people are no longer supportive, then actually technological change becomes quite difficult. Because I think you said at the start is that actually it's not really about the technology, it's about people. Ultimately, all we're doing is we're enabling people to either do a job better or to do a job differently. But we are not, in the job of always trying to replace people. Ultimately, we want organizations to be able to grow, and that's what we're trying to help them to do. So yeah, the change structure is a real issue.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you said, it's very important to involve people as soon as possible,
Yeah.
as quickly as possible in the beginning. How can you take those people with you in this whole change, this whole implementation? How do you make sure that they are bought into it? They understand what the
Yeah.
consequences will be of the implementation. How can you take people with you from the beginning?
There's two elements to that. One is so if I give a couple of examples of we build quite a lot of healthcare applications. We do a lot of work in the NHS, and when you are dealing with pathways which are effectively about people's health, obviously there is a lot more repercussion than just me building a new CRM system or an email system. Um, and one of the things that we've learned from those types of projects, and really we embed it across our business, is that identifying not just the stakeholders who are championing the project is important, but the stakeholders who will be most impacted is equally important. And if you look at the healthcare example, we, from when we look at it from a strategic perspective, we talk about a three-pillar issue within healthcare, and that's there's the payer or the commissioner, and in the UK that tends to be the NHS. There's the user, which may either be a clinician or it may be a patient, and then there's the end outcome person, which tends to be the patient. And in reality, in an ideal world, you need all three of those people to see a benefit from the technological change. And if they don't, it's really likely that the technology that you implement will not have the desired outcomes. Where we've worked with user groups, we work with patient focus groups to try and find out what the change will mean for them, how they manage their condition at the moment. If we give them a digital tool, does it make their life actually easier? Because it's easier to sit on the other side and say, oh, well, if we gave somebody an app to monitor this, it'd be great. And the clinician sitting there thinking, oh, well, this will be wonderful. I'll get this data straight to a dashboard. I'll be able to see all of these influx. But actually, what they forget is that in the day-to-day life of the patient, we're actually asking them to then take 5-10 minutes out of their day to do a task which they are not currently doing. And with all the best will in the world, unless there's a real requirement that they can understand, it's unlikely that we'll get the uptake that we think we will. So therefore, we don't get the end benefits when we do the implementations. And that's why when we do those type of user focus groups, we really look at saying, well, actually, okay, there's some requirements here. How do we minimize that impact for that patient group? How do we make it either part of a day-to-day routine, or how do we make it part of an existing routine which they already have? So that way it doesn't bring new friction into the day. It actually allows them to continue through the day, and you get much better uptake. And similarly, we've seen applications where for the end benefit for the patient, it's brilliant, but for the clinician, it creates workload which they don't currently have space for. And in an NHS that's already overrun, if you say to the clinician, "Oh, this is wonderful," it will, improve the speed of recovery for a patient. But you're asking the clinician to do another 20 minutes, half an hour worth of work every day. Their answer will be, "But when do I do that?" It's not that I don't want to do it, but actually I do not have the ability to be able to do that. So that whole thing of being able to ensure that we can tick off all of those areas is really important. And then ultimately, if the commissioner is not seeing a benefit in terms of either efficiencies or reduction in cost, what's the rationale that they would use to actually deploy something like that? So it's important to understand the entire ecosystem of all the stakeholders involved, not just the champions, but the end users, and then those people that we don't necessarily see in that journey. We need to bring them on board.
Yeah, yeah, those are some good examples that you shared there. I'm actually curious about, like, as most companies want to try to sort of quantify the return of a
Yeah.
change, of an investment, of an implementation. You already mentioned, well, in the healthcare example, it's obviously about the recovery of a patient. That is, I think, obviously the end goal in the end for those types of businesses.
Yeah.
Are there any other measures of success that you can think of that companies can use to gauge whether an implementation, whether a new technology or a change in a process actually yields results for the business?
Yeah, I think one of the most common themes that we see is that at the start of a project, not enough time is spent around discussing what the success KPIs actually are. And so often you see technology projects being post rationalized. And instead of talking about what the outcomes and outputs of the success were, we'll talk about we delivered it on budget, we delivered it on time. And these suddenly become the KPIs because there was nothing properly implemented at the start. And let's be honest, delivering a project on time and on budget should be the given, but somehow we hold it as it was a successful. This is a great success. But that bit where we talked about how do we talk to the business and the questions that we ask the business at the start, that's really where we pulled together the metrics, because quite often if we're putting together, you can talk about some simple things like even just websites, so actually understanding what is the outcome of developing a new website. If this is an organization that has been around for a long time and already has a really mature digital estate, and they are not building any new products, etc., it is highly unlikely that just building a new website is going to increase user traffic. Suddenly overnight, just because you have a new widget on the website does not mean that loads of people are going to go visit it. And so sometimes you need to be clear with both the client as what is the expectation here? Actually, why are we embarking on this project? Is it just because we feel that design needs a refresh? Or is it because actually you've gone through a rebranding exercise and so you want your website now to reflect the new brand? In which case, then actually the success factors here is how much of the new branding guidelines have we carried over? And we might do that with a set of focus groups, or we might do that with a set of user engagement to try and understand, compared to the old website and the new website, have we done that? So sometimes the metrics that we choose aren't about increasing users. They aren't necessarily about the engagement. Sometimes they're about actually we're doing a like for like, and what's the net result for the business here. But where we have things where we think actually we need to improve outputs, in those cases, we strongly try and suggest to the client is, do you have data at the outstart? Because one of the things that we often find is they're not tracking the thing that they want to measure at the end. And even just using the base, the website example again, the amount of sites where we say, well, actually, can you pass us your current analytics? Because they'll be like, oh yeah, we implemented analytics a long time ago. We've never actually looked at them though. And it's like, well, then how will we ever know whether we've improved in 3 months' time if we don't know where we're starting from? So we, as part of our starting up process, it's one of our almost the kickoff points of any project is really getting the client to understand what is the data that they need to be able to get hold of to be able to demonstrate success at the end.
Yeah, and with all of that you explained in like helping these companies understand like why do we even do this change? Is the current process that we want to change, or is it even set up well? Like having people with it as well, making sure that they understand why this change is happening, what's in it for them, but also then about the metrics. Why do we do this? What are we looking to improve? How can we measure that in the end? It looks like really you're building, well, quite some good relationships and partnerships with clients because, well, this is very comprehensive. You're helping them go through it from part 1 to part 10, let me say it like that. I'm just curious, like especially in bespoke development, where you're sort of creating completely new applications, new technology.
Yeah.
How can you make sure, and how I see bespoke development, and I might have it wrong, so I would love to get your perspective on that. How I see bespoke development is that you sort of do one-off projects for a specific kind of thing, and then, you leave the company again. Can you talk me maybe a little bit through on why this might be different than just building strong long-term relationship with clients, and what the key elements of such a successful partnership are?
Yeah. So there's something like about the ethos, and when we present to new clients, we always talk about the one word that we use is collaboration. And I think the biggest difference between building bespoke software versus somebody selling you an off-the-shelf package or doing an implementation of something that exists is that actually everybody has a very good concept of what they're buying. Like, there's a list of features that have already been there, they've been tried, tested, they're in the marketplace, and the expectation of the end result of the implementation is pretty well known. Whereas when we are building bespoke, the reality is that there'll be sometimes actually even just teasing out the business problem itself takes a bit of time so that we make sure that we're addressing the right problem. But the other thing is the collaboration is key, because what we don't believe in is taking a brief from a client, going away and building something for 3-6 months, then coming back and saying to the client, here it is. That is probably one of the biggest setups for failure for technology projects, because clients need to come on the journey with you, because the journey is never a straight line. So when we start with a brief and we start building and we start asking questions, an example of something that we're working on at the moment with a client started as a replacement for their current stock control system. That has now moved on to actually, as we built through, they've said, well, actually, once we've got some of this stock that we've built, the QA team who need to go check some of the products, at the moment, they use their own system. Why would they do that when actually they can use this system, see what we've got, and then actually to log in exactly and say, these are the batches that are being QA'd, these ones haven't done. And so now it's moving from a stock control system to a stock control plus a QA system. But now that we've got some more data in there, that actually now is starting to say, well, actually, this should probably directly feed into some of the management information. So it's, as the project has evolved, we've worked with the client and we're able to say, well, actually, what if we add this on? Will this add an efficiency to you? And this is not about selling additional bits for the sake of selling them. It's only where there's value that we can provide. And that collaboration is important so that we are actually involving them on data point, because more often than not, it's not actually our idea, it's the client's idea, where they see something.
Exactly.
And what we have to remember is that clients can't visualize everything that we can do. But once we start showing them things, that's when they get excited and they'll say, but Albany, if you built X for me, can we make that X plus 2 now? Can that do this little bit extra over here? And sometimes we'll say, yes, it can. And other times we'll say, it can do that, but the value add from the required build is probably not what you think it will be. And so it might not be an efficient use of your resources. So we're very clear with our clients about where we think it's a good idea and where it's not. And I think that really helps, because our view of openness, what it does, it really helps to build trust. And given that in a lot of SMEs, these are quite large budgets that they're playing with, they need to have that trust. The last thing that the CTO or the tech director who we might be working with, or an operations director, wants to do, stand in front of a board and say, oh, yes, we spent X amount last year on this product, on building this new technology. And either it doesn't do what we thought it was going to do, or actually it's not going to be delivered for another year. Nobody wants those conversations. But by making sure the client is with us along that journey, we are able to ensure that the information that everybody needs is available all the time. So there's no surprises. And that, for us, collaboration is definitely the most successful aspect. The most important aspect of a successful client relationship.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, like it's the client that dictates whether they want something else, they want something more. It's not about upselling. I think it's logical that after like a really straightforward build, a brief, a specific thing that you want to have built, you can showcase some expertise from your end. You can show that you can deliver upon your promises, and then for them, it's only logical to keep working with you guys, because they probably have tons of new use cases that they didn't realize that they had. But with you as a partner where you can spark together, where you can find new opportunities, they will, and they see the value of the initial thing that you built. They will constantly be looking for some additional opportunities to create and to change. Are there any specific examples that you can share here? For example, you came into a business with a very small project, then you've built a trust there, which has grown into a big partnership and all about collaboration. How did that work? Any examples that you can share there?
So there's the example that I was just talking about, but also I think probably more on enterprise level. So we've worked for the last 6-7 years now with GSK in the UK. Obviously, we're a global pharmaceutical business, and we've been building We were originally briefed to just build a specific pharmacy portal for them. And since then, we've gone on to work on Power BI, data development, AI and machine learning projects. Um, and and it's not to say, in a company like GSK, there are, a multitude of different technology suppliers in there, but it's building, as we said, that trust aspect. And quite often what we offer compared to much, our larger competitor set is the nimble approach. So the fact is that, quite often we can deliver great proof of concepts of, somebody might come to us with an idea and say, oh, actually, what, we've seen this, AI obviously currently is a hot topic. We've seen this implementation in another organization. Do you think this could work here? And we have a really short proof of concept workshop that we do. And within 5 to 6 weeks, we can display that to the client and say, okay, this is how it would look like. And this is almost like a working version of it, a prototype. And that really helps them to be able to engage with us, because obviously in larger technology partners, that sort of working isn't the norm. And whereas we try and make sure that we're as flexible as possible for our clients. So that often opens up and helps us to engage across different departments and different divisions.
Great. Thanks for sharing. If we then look into the future, you obviously said, well, AI is very hot right now. Yeah. Where do you see, what are the recent developments that you are watching? Where do you see software? Where do you see development going into the next couple of years?
I think that the pace of a change is so rapid at the moment that it's difficult to know where we'll be tomorrow, let alone in 3 months' time or a year's time. And I'd say that one thing is true is that our industry, software development, is probably one of the ones that we're most heavily impacted by this. And I think that anybody who thinks that's not the case is probably currently just head in the sand a little bit. I don't think that in 3 or 5 years that businesses even like ours will necessarily have software engineers writing code in the way that we do at the moment. There are some really great pieces out there already where effectively you can provide narrative input and produce code for building a website, for building particular types of product. Great code checkers at the moment, so the ability to run through the code that you've written and find errors, bugs at a really, really, really fast rate. So I think the reality is for us as an industry, as a business, we're already starting to prepare for that. We're starting to see actually how do we implement that into our processes, make them more efficient, because we want to be able to see that actually we're using the technology that's coming through correctly. Because if we're going to advise clients on how we implement it, we've got to be able to showcase that we're able to do some of this internally as well. And if we look at broader, I'd say that we're at the beginning of what this whole movement with Gen AI over the last year, 18 months, has happened at such a pace that I think we are seeing lots of user cases being thrown out. Some will stick, some won't. I think even yesterday's announcement with Apple, pushing ChatGPT onto the phone itself, I think we're going to see more and more of those type of use cases. I think one of the most things where we're wary of the future and what some of the challenges that some people and expertise and areas will face is the use case that we see at the moment of AI assisting the expert or acting as the backup, which seems like a really good open way of bringing in artificial intelligence. It doesn't replace someone, but it adds another layer of certainty. And we work a lot we talked about in health tech, and so you see this in radiology. It's really, really become quite a common theme now. So for some cancer checks, for instance, you used to have 2 radiologists who used to view an X-ray to be able to say, well, actually, or the image or whichever scan they'd had, MRI, to be able to confirm whether or not that was done. They're now starting to use AI for that. The problem becomes is that actually those experts have already got 10 years worth of expertise with them. And if we are saying that actually we're using AI to supplement those experts and no longer bringing forward more junior people to do that, that's great now, but in 5 to 10 years' time, will we have any juniors that are ready to become experts? And so therefore, is the AI sitting on the room on its own because the experts have now moved on? And how do we see that as a society problem that needs to be solved? Because really, it's not just that's one use case, but it's across the board this is quite a common theme of how we're seeing AI being implemented. But actually, in 5-10 years time from now, who will be the expert in the room with the AI then? And that's one of the things that I think it'll be really interesting to see how that develops. But that said, we're really positive about it. We think that overall, the benefits for society are amazing. I think we're only touching the briefs in things like education. Healthcare, I think, is probably one that's talked about a lot, but it's probably the most complex area to go into. And there are, especially in the UK, because we can talk about that in more in detail, is that there are a lot more technological issues in the UK that can be fixed with very much simpler technology than necessarily implementing AI. If you walk into a ward, some of them, if you look at just how some of the equipment is, you would say, actually, if we just spent our money on giving better laptops and new machinery, that would probably give us better outcome than saying that we're going to spend X million on implementing AI. So I think that there is that issue of sometimes AI is crowding out some of the investment that would normally have gone to other types of technology, which is now becoming much more obsessed with. If it doesn't have AI in the label, it doesn't seem to get funding. Which then, I suppose, leads us to the last thing of the problem is that this whole description of what is AI, nowadays we look at things that are pitched to us and things that, 2-3 years ago we would have developed and we would have called it a static algorithm. Now somebody is saying, well, no, that's AI. And we're like, well, if that's what you want to call it, that's fine. But I think that the overuse or the overhype of the term has made it really difficult for people to really get an understanding of, well, actually, is this really AI or not? And I think even some of the simpler stuff that's been around for years now is just being relabeled and repackaged. But we may be at a cusp where there will come a point where people will become a little bit obsessed because it will become more of the norm, so it won't have to have the label.
Well, thanks for sharing, and thanks for giving that perspective as well.
Yeah.
Most people are a little bit pulled and sucked into the AI hype, because I think it is a hype. Again, there is some good stuff in there. It's going to change industries. It's going to change technologies.
Yeah.
But we have to be a little bit cautious and a little bit more critical about what it actually is and how to actually use it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
If someone else is watching this video, Perninder, and wants to learn more about you, wants to talk to you, wants to learn more about Imobisoft, where can they find you?
Sure. So go see us on imobisoft.co.uk, and please look me up on LinkedIn. And I'd be more than happy to chat with anybody who wants to understand a little bit more about how we can help implement technology solutions in organizations.
Awesome. I'll make sure those links are in the description as well, so people can find you easily. I want to thank you, Perninder, on this great conversation. I think we've discussed some interesting things, and I wish you all the best for the future.
Great. No, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been wonderful.
Awesome.